Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoutmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Welcome back to the Active Turnkey podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoutmeister, and this is the Tom Olson.
That's me,
He's
Tom
still
Olson.
here. He's still here. He's still with us, bringing the heat. And so today we have another...
It's not very hot here in Indiana right now.
No, it's not. It's actually cold. But maybe not for you.
I'll start a fire in my fireplace tonight, though. I'll bring the heat.
He will bring the heat in that fashion, and so Tom can do that. So today's
You're the one that normally tries to be funny.
I'm not, though, so it's okay. I'm efforting and I'm failing. So
No, but this time I'm trying to be funny and it's not working.
It's good.
Okay,
It's very
all right.
funny.
Jared thought it was funny, so I'm
So
good.
Today's episode, we probably got to get in this quickly, is about the appraisal.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's the response I was expecting, and if you're out there oohing, that I can totally get that. So, you know, that is the fear from probably every seller.
The appraisal, Jared.
Yeah, the appraisal.
I got a picture on my phone I'm going to try to find for you about appraisers.
Okay. So, I mean, I can only imagine what would be in that picture. Should we include this in the podcast is the question.
Yeah, I think we should. I think so. Like,
What do you got?
The people that can't see this, because this is actually a video podcast and an actual regular podcast on different platforms. But the people that can see this, I'm going to kind of show you this picture that just kind of came up not too long ago, and it's your home as seen by you, by the buyers, by an appraiser, and by a tax assessor. Sure. And it's kind of funny, right? Because
it is.
You know, so you think it's a nice, quaint house. It's clean. It's not the Taj Mahal. It's
right.
But it's done up nice. It's
sure.
You know, for us, you know, on a flip, for instance, or even a turnkey rental, we're doing granite. We're doing nice finishes, and we're trying to make it nice, clean, safe. Mm-hmm. And upgraded in the 21st century, and not just like something that's 50 years old and dated and nasty, right? So your buyers always think, well, instead of like being that way, it's kind of like it's a little sloppy. It's maybe the perception of this gingerbread house, for instance, about half the size of what you perceive it to be. The appraisers have kind of a house that doesn't have any paint. Has a bunch of issues.
Well, it hasn't been updated in the
half
last
falling
2 decades.
down. Hasn't been updated but the tax assessor, my goodness, it's the Taj Mahal. It's the nicest house in the neighborhood, and it's even nicer than what that neighborhood should be worth.
Sure.
And so for some reason it's assessed like $100,000 more than what it could possibly be, right? So I'm sorry, but that picture in my mind,
it's applicable.
Kind of just was embedded when you asked about what my experience, what the general perception of appraisers are.
Yeah, I think a buyer wants, like a retail buyer, wants the finishes of the Taj Mahal, but at the price of the
shack.
The shack.
Yeah,
correct.
That's true. That's true.
So it's okay. I get it. We've all been there as home buyers, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably.
So in that along that line, it's appraisers. This is the fear of every seller, particularly those who are in real estate, even those who are flipping. If you get a house under contract, you'd love to believe that there are 5-6 comps that are just zeroed in on your property and you know the value. But what is, in your experience, Tom, what is the general perception of appraisers, even locally here or even around the country? What do people say about appraisals or appraisers?
I think it's just like this picture. It depends on who you ask. So the perception
political.
of
well done.
If you're a real estate investor, the perception of the appraiser is this is the person that blows up 1 out of every 10 of my deals. Maybe more. I don't know. For us, we don't have that issue as much. I think we've had some pretty good luck with good appraisers, and we've also done our best to kind of understand them. And I think that's part of what this podcast is going to be about. Maybe in the future we can do another podcast and actually go over a couple of appraisals right here and make people kind of understand what I'm talking about. But appraisers do have an important role in the whole realm of real estate because most real estate has lending involved with it. And really, they're there to help protect the investor. I mean, and when I say investor, I don't mean what we consider investor, us. The real investor in some of those is the bank. It's the money that's coming to to that deal. So they're there to help protect the bank and help protect the mortgage broker or the mortgage company that's loaning you the money, or the lender on the back end. So they do have an important part to be able to give a third party supposed unbiased opinion of value of the property.
So what is his job? What does he do? Ultimately, when it comes down to everything, if you were to describe it in one sentence, what would you say? What is his job?
I believe his job is to actually give a pure, unbiased opinion of value based on like a set of parameters.
Okay,
that's what I believe that they're supposed to do.
So your short answer,
and that
creates questions.
It does, absolutely, because the set of parameters should be there, and that set of parameters should be based on the finishes of the property, based on how well it's been maintained, is there deferred maintenance, and comps of the other, and that should be in comparison to other comparable. Now we're talking about single family, for the most part, appraisers. So when you get into commercial, when you get into multifamily, the appraisal box, so to speak, is different. So for the purposes of today's thing, I think we want to talk more about single family, rentals, and actually even appraisers with a fix and flip, with just a regular, typical house, or even your own house. We might even get into your own house a little bit, and how an appraiser may appraise your own property when you do a cash out refi.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because you just kind of mentioned it. We are going to focus primarily on the single family, and that this would apply to turnkeys, Burr Method. We'll touch on that today, or like you said, the cash out refinance, if you have your own personal home. Now, lending is needed. You kind of touched on it for this box. It's the rentals. It's needed for lending purposes, tax assessments, buyer and seller negotiations.
I don't like that one. I don't think that has any. It shouldn't have anything to do with it, really.
It shouldn't.
But I think it does for some reason.
It's listed.
It's a cause and effect. It's something that's happening that's not really and I think that there's problems with appraisers and appraisals at times because of that there. Because buyers want to use it as a negotiation tool, and sometimes sellers could if for some reason it's a fault. I mean, I've seen faulty appraisals on both sides. I've seen them way too high and way too low. And I think a lot of that has to do with the biasness part sometimes of that particular appraiser. They may not they may not like a particular area. They, there's a lot of redlining in different areas that we've seen around the country. So that could be an issue. But I think, and some appraisers have their own opinions, which is not supposed to be part of this. It's supposed to be non-biased and supposed to have a set of parameters. But really, how an appraisal, just so everybody understands out there, an appraisal is typically done, like how much money a house is going to appraise for, is normally done based on square footage. So I think that's an important piece to understand. Square footage is probably the most important piece of an appraisal, as long as finishes are consistent between the subject property and another property that they're comparing it to. If one house is 1,500 square foot and your house is only 1,000 square foot, well, your house is not going to appraise for the same dollar amount as the other one. Now, should it appraise for the same dollar per square foot? It should. It should be close to. So if it's $100 a square foot for a 1,500 square foot property, that property should appraise for $150,000, right? But so that 1,000 square foot property should appraise for, if all things are created or were equal, same bed bath, same finishes, same condition, same deferred maintenance, same garage space, same lot space, all those things go into play. But if all those things are consistent and the same, that 1,000 square foot property in that same neighborhood with the $150,000 comp should appraise for $100,000. So you're going to have differences, and I think the market drives this to a certain degree, because the market itself says, if a buyer says, I want to buy this property for this much money, they're the ones that ultimately get to decide. Sure. But then you have this other person that kind of gets to decide whether or not you can really sell it for that much or not. So, and that's why this is a tricky, conversation, because on one point, the banks do need protection. I'm not trying to. I don't never want to make it sound like the banks don't need appraisers. I mean, there are actual new statutes out now that I don't think banks actually even need appraisals if a property is under $400,000. However, what banks do you know that are actually going to, not have appraisals? Even hard money lenders now, most of the time, are having appraisals. Yeah. So, anyways, I mean, they can be used for that, and
well, you had that happen
other
recently.
Things as well.
Locally, we had a guy. It's not on a script here, but you had a guy who, an agent who placed an offer, and we had an accepted, and they told you flat out it would not appraise.
Oh, right. Oh, shit. This happens all the time.
He was putting money on it.
Yeah.
Or like, I like dinner.
Yeah, he sells me a steak dinner. Yeah, he does. Absolutely. Yes, I forgot about that.
Remember that guy.
I still get a steak dinner from somebody. And I told him, I'm like, no, this house is going to appraise.
Yeah.
We've got the square foot. It's way more square footage than the other houses. Well, this house over here only sold for 105. There's no way this house can sell for 120. And it appraised just fine.
Well, without getting into the nitty-gritty, he's absolutely right. When he says all things created equal, square footage above grade, for sure. Making sure that 1,500 square feet combined is not the same as 1,500 square foot above grade. But I digress.
Well, you also even have to look at style of house. So, a 2-story is going to get appraised different than a ranch, different than a bi-level, different than tri-level. Right. If in a perfect world, an appraiser would have 3 of the exact same comp in that exact same, couple blocks, and that's appraisers probably like that.
Oh, sure.
if they can find those,
nice and easy.
Exactly. So, sure. But then you have market shifts that happen up and down, and appraisers got to be careful of that, because with the last market downturn, a lot of appraisers got in trouble because they appraised a bunch of properties. I don't really think it was much of their fault, honestly, at all. I don't really think appraisers had much to do at all with the downturn or with the the economic crash, because banks typically push one way or another. And we've seen this. I've seen banks try to push appraisals down and depress appraisals down. I've also seen banks try to push them up. Right now, for instance, in the C-, D+ neighborhoods, they're being pushed up by the banks because they're being forced to loan in those types of areas because of a lot of accusations of redlining in certain areas. So,
and even incentivized now. They're even being incentivized by their...
Well, they have to, because a small dollar loan doesn't create enough money for somebody to be able to do all the processing and to make it work. So I understand it on both sides. But anyways, back to the appraiser themselves, and back to what can we expect? And like I said, I think it'd be a good thing to do in the future of a podcast. And we just kind of go. It'd be a very analytical podcast.
Sure.
But kind of almost go line by line and just maybe bring out a couple different appraisals.
Yeah.
And maybe even get an appraiser on and talk to them solely about this. But I think an appraisal is a very important piece to any deal that has a loan attached to it.
So moving on into where we're at. So he mentioned single family, that's where we're at. And these rules could apply to single family homes if you're looking to flip. But for the most part, we're looking turnkey rentals. That's what we're focusing on with the podcast. So today we're going to kind of go with the angle that we've kind of touched on in different podcasts, but focusing on the difference particularly to Burr Method or Active Turnkey to standard turnkey. And so, and with the appraisal and the risks that could come with either one, or the pros and cons. So we'll kind of circle here around the Active Turnkey or the Burr Method first. And so, if you've seen any of our stuff, we believe Active Turnkey is the best way to buy rentals. You have the best opportunities if everything works out the way you'd like it to. It's the best way to go. However, it doesn't always go that way. And there are 2 main risks to Burr Method. And what is that?
The 2 main risks to Active Turnkey or Burr would be you get into a property and it takes a lot more rehab than you originally think.
And how often does that happen?
Every time.
Okay.
So, and honestly, when we started doing this 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't every time. It was, the standard rehab would probably cost about $2,000 to $4,000 more than what we originally would think. But nowadays, it's almost like contractor issues, along with NIPSCO issues, along with city issues. makes almost every single property now that we are rehabbing costs $5,000 to $10,000 more than what you were, and that's just right off the top if nothing major actually even happens, and that's just almost the cost of doing business now. Which honestly is part of the reason why we don't do as many active turnkeys personally as we used to. Now, do I think this is going to be a trend that lasts forever? Probably not. I don't know. I do know that it's a lot harder to find contractors now than it's ever been. I do know that the reasoning for that is vast because in 2008, 2009, all those contractors, they found different jobs, and and now you've got a whole generation, almost a whole 8, 9, 10 years worth of fathers that were carpenters that now are not teaching their kids how to be carpenters, and that's going to take a long time to recover from. Plus, contractors have been kind of demoted in a lot of people's minds to a job that people don't want, or like it's a backup job, it's a backup plan instead of being like what somebody used to want to be. So I'm not sure why that is. Now, with that has actually done the exact opposite effect to the industry itself. So now contractors are getting paid more than they've ever gotten paid, and they have a lot more because of supply and demand. So there's two risks. That's number one risk. And the number two risk of active turnkey is the house may not appraise for what it really should. And honestly, there's some really good reasons for that. And I don't even think that, and don't get me wrong, like, am I upset if I get an appraisal on one of my properties that I did the Burr Method on and it doesn't quite hit what I think it should hit? Absolutely. But I also do understand why they don't always appraise. And so think about it. And I can give you a great example, even with one of the dentists that has bought lots of properties from us. Before he got into investing with us, he decided to go refinance his own house because he had his entire house paid off, and it was about a 5,500 square foot house up in Michigan, and nice area. I've been to the house myself personally, and he just had a house that was sold right around the corner from his house during this time, and it sold for $550,000. Okay, so he thought, okay, I'm going to refinance my own property. I'm going to pull out cash, and that cash I'm going to use to either be a lender or to buy active turnkey properties or whatever the case is. He just felt he had started getting some education. And I think depending on age, it could be a good idea, bad idea. I think sometimes you are actually in a less risky position personally if you do have a mortgage on your own property. But I know people would fight against me on both ways, and I don't really want to get into that argument. But I think there's very good reasons to have your house paid off, but I also think that there's very good reasons personally to have a mortgage on your property as well. So he had gotten some education, and he was of the mindset that it's probably less risky for me to actually have a mortgage on my own personal residence and to pull that money out and invest that money. And it was no convincing of mine. I did not convince him to do that. Somebody else did. But I'm like, fine, that's fine. Let's go for it. So what happened? What do you think happened?
It appraised way more than he thought.
So it did not appraise for $750,000. No,
more?
But think about it. It's a 5,500 square foot house on a golf course. Actually on a golf course. No, it's not on that golf. It's by that a golf course. I was thinking it was by a golf course that used to be a PGA course.
That would have helped
Warwick. But anyway, so it wasn't on that one. It was on a course next to it. But anyway, so it was a great house. Everything amazing about it, but the house only appraised for $375,000.
Nice.
On a cash out refi. So even on your own personal residence, you can see how an appraiser just had a house sell 2 blocks down, same square footage, same type of 2-story. Actually, I mean, we even thought our subject property was better, nicer. We had a big landscaping thing in the back where this house, the other house that sold didn't. But the house that was sold for $550 appraised for $550, and the cash out refi only appraised for $375. And even though he went back and tried to fight it, like they wouldn't give him any more than $375. So and maybe you're sitting there thinking that's not a good example. I don't know, and I know that for us, for turnkeys, for instance, or active turnkey, we're probably not going to be buying 5,500 square foot houses
generally.
But I just thought that. I wanted to use that example as an extreme example, thinking even your own personal home that has nice finishes that you can justify without a shadow of a doubt still may not appraise depending on that appraiser.
Well, that'll be actually a really good opportunity down the road for another podcast is, in that situation, what do you do when a house doesn't appraise? We'll go through the appraisals, good and bad, and kind of talk through what you do. How do you challenge? What do you do? But I think it's exactly the case. Sometimes the data is there. You see what's on the market, and it doesn't appraise. And so, I have here you vetted the deal. So let's bring it back to turnkey. So you vetted the deal. You bought it. You finished a rehab, and let's just say in this case the rehab was close to being on target. You've done everything right. You placed a tenant at the estimated rent or projected rent you had, and at the very end, after all that, it doesn't appraise.
Well, I think at the end of the day, like, you're not really in a worse position. Do you have more cash out of your pocket? Yes. But we're investors. That's what we do. So, to me, the way I look at it, and most of my investors that have continued on and continue to do more and more and more have had that mindset. They're like, you know what? Hey, let's just think. I thought it was going to be appraised for 120. I have $100,000 into this, so I thought I'd be able to get a $98,000 loan, but maybe I only end up getting a $90,000 loan. Okay, so I'm into this property, $8,000 more of my own cash.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That means my payment's lower. That means my cash on cash return might be lower because I have more money out. But it also means that my monthly income or my monthly net profit is higher because my payment's a little bit lower.
And you're taxed on less income throughout the year.
Yeah, all these things kind of like it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like if you're really scrounging pennies, I would say maybe you shouldn't even be an investor at that point anyways. Maybe you should wait until you have a little bit more cash and have a lot more emergency funding before you're worried about that. But really the people that I've seen that have been very successful in this that just keep doing it over and over again, adding 10, 20 properties a year to their portfolio are people that have the mindset of, hey, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Yes, it's a risk. Yes, I'd prefer to probably get more of my own cash because it's almost like free money. That's the thing. The more, with the interest rates that we are seeing right now, we're seeing low 4.2% refinances right now. It's crazy how cheap the money is. And 30-year money at 4.2 is almost free money because if you think about inflation and think about the dollar, what's going to be worth in 30 years versus what it is today, it's almost like shorting the dollar by getting money today. So, I think we all want to get the most money we could possibly get out of our refinances. I do, and I do this myself as well. Like I want to get as much money as I possibly can. But at the end of the day, can I fight and get an extra $5,000? Great, yes. And if it works, fine. If not, I don't think it's the end of the world. So does it make sense?
Oh, totally, absolutely.
But so comparing that though, so that's one of the other risks. When you talk about active turnkey, number one, rehab, time frame. You may lose rent. Like if it lasts 6, 7, 8 months before you can get a tenant in there, now you've lost 8 months worth of rent that you don't have with a turnkey that's already rented. And then now turnkey, you have a buyer. So the appraiser, and this is just my opinion, I think. This is just what I've observed over selling 1,500 deals plus in our years and buying and selling a lot myself personally. What I have seen is when there's a buyer and a seller and they agree on a price, that now becomes another data point that for some reason does mean a lot to the appraiser. That's the one piece I don't understand. Why is a cash out refi so much different? They should. And if you talk to an appraiser, they're going to tell you, no, it doesn't make a difference. But I can tell you and I can show you the proof that's in the pudding. I could show you, HUD statements that will prove to you it does matter. It's
true.
It does matter when you have a buyer and a seller agreeing on an actual value. Now, most of the time, what are we? And I don't even know the answer to this. So I'm not involved as much into the day-to-day of Olson Group that you are when you're selling turnkeys. On average, what's normally the case, Jared, when a turnkey property sells and an appraiser goes out there? Like, how often does it actually appraise for the actual sales price?
Very consistently. In fact, you're absolutely right. In the risk is much higher in active turnkey that it won't appraise for the projected amount using the same comps. The same comps that we would do if we were to vet the deal internally for a turnkey deal, and we go through from the sale, from the A to B sale to purchase to the rehab to getting it rented and then putting on the market to sell turnkey, as opposed to selling it at the very beginning to an investor with a rehab, getting it rented, and then doing the cash out refinance. We use the same comps to establish the value of that, project the value. And we would use the same comps to send the appraiser or what have you, and yet it is... You're on to something here, and
right. So
hopefully we're not going to get in trouble with this when this goes online. This is going to be.
I don't think so. You might have an appraiser or two that gets their panties in a wad. I don't think they will, because in a way, like I do think that they bring value to the marketplace. Mm-hmm. I am not the person that's going to bash appraisers all the time.
Sure.
You could even check my social media. I don't have a ton of like. I don't really want to bash anybody. Honestly, I really do want to be uplifting in all of our marketing and all of our things that we do. And I think that they do have a important role, but I also think that they're pushed or they're guided by what they are given from the banks. So the banks, depending on the type of appraisal it is, that also has to do with how they appraise properties as well. FHA, Fannie Mae. And I'm not going to get into all the guidelines, because that would be something that we could actually have an appraiser go through and talk about themselves personally. But I have just seen throughout the years many different appraisals and how they come up with what they come up with. Now, some stuff you just scratch your head and you're like, huh? What like, where did that come from? You know, like I've seen houses that had like, it literally felt like it was falling down and nothing on a report, and then other things where everything looked amazing and they wanted you to do a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So for FHA purposes.
Sure.
So but what we've seen is, like Jared said, in the exact same neighborhoods, the exact same houses, exact same square footage, exact same finishes, an active turnkey on average is not going to appraise for as much as an actual turnkey or a sale that's going to happen at the time of that loan being processed.
Absolutely. The same comps, the likelihood, there's a higher chance that it wouldn't appraise.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So why don't these appraise? So we're going to kind of get a little bit deeper into particularly the Burr Method, why these situations may not appraise. First of all, if you're doing it, it's possible maybe you just bought wrong.
Maybe, I mean, if you're not talking about us, for instance,
of course.
But if you're talking about other people, if you're doing your own Burr Method, you just might have missed the mark.
That happens. We see that
absolutely,
all
and
the time.
we have missed the mark ourselves, and we have thought houses, should be worth way more than they were. And vice versa. Like I've had properties, honestly, I've even sold to investors where I told the investor this is going to appraise for 150 and it appraised for 180. So it's happened both ways. It doesn't happen as often that they appraise higher,
right?
Than you think than it does that they should appraise lower on a cash out refi, for instance. But definitely, you could definitely buy wrong.
Well, I've seen it actually more probably on flips. That it appraises higher. When it doesn't really matter. And that's a whole other situation. So they could buy wrong. Here's another one. The market could shift.
Absolutely.
And so that could be either way. Either way. Now, right now, we really haven't seen it. In fact, the other day I was looking at an appraisal in Griffith, a town right next door to where our office is located. And each year, the average median price went up. And over the course since 2008, it's gone up like $30,000 in the town of Griffith. And so,
actually, I'm not sure if you've seen this or not, but Northwest Indiana, I was ranked in the top 5 of profitability for flips in 2019. I mean, it's
for where, like, what was the
whole country?
Wow,
like
interesting.
So, like, as far as you're talking about, for the last 2 to 3 years, this area has like really started to, and we're so far behind the rest of the market, which kind of happened like in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. Now we're finally starting to see some of that appreciation that everybody else gets.
And that obviously that's a strategy to most, but that could be one issue because again, depending on when your acquisition happens, for us. Is our timeline's the same timeline if we're selling a turnkey is the same timeline as a buyer who's doing Burr. So they're buying at the very beginning. There's a rehab. You may be placing a tenant. If you wait that long, you want to wait the full 6 months. And then by the time the sale happens, where there's an actual loan and an appraisal, that's plenty of time for a market to shift.
Yeah, so and actually, like possible. When you talk about market shifts, I think sometimes it's just we're part of it's part of a cycle, and And I know this might sound crazy, but even within the same year, there are cycles.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you think about it right now, well, I'm not sure when this podcast is going to go out, but right now, like in the middle of the wintertime, I believe that houses actually appraise for less. They sell for less. Like, and maybe like that kind of hurts a little bit when you get into the first couple months of the year and then things start to go up. So there's like a cycle. Think about it, even daily. There's a daily cycle in real estate. How many houses sell at night? Not very many. So think about that. Like there's a bigger cycle. Most real estate, there's people that say that there's a 7-year cycle. That's fine for economy, but I don't believe that there's a 7-year cycle in real estate as much. A lot of people believe that real estate follows the general economic cycles. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that real estate's a lot longer cycle. And what I've read and what I've come to kind of believe is I think it's more of an 18, 19, 20-year cycle. So, so for us, like, do I think that we're in a correction? Not yet. I do believe it's going to happen at some point. Do I think it's going to be 2008? Absolutely not. Do I think most people under $200,000 are still 100% safe? Absolutely, because I don't think you can build for $200,000 less anymore. And I think that changes what we've seen in the past. But markets can absolutely shift. So like, who knows when that may happen and what areas something bad might happen in an area, and boom, like everything drops. So absolutely, but it could also shift up.
Sure. Oh, and that's what we're seeing at least in our market is a gradual appreciation. So we bought wrong. That's an opportunity. The market may shift in either direction. The third thing is it could be a bad appraisal.
Yep. And
that happens. Recently we had, and when you're communicating with appraisals like we do on almost a daily basis, sometimes you can have great relationships and then it can shift. We had that happen recently where open communication, open dialogue, and then a poor appraisal came through, or at least to an investor he wanted to challenge. So we challenged the appraisal. He didn't like that, and the next one he did was very poor, to the point where he literally used comps that were for a 3-bed house. All 5 of the comps he used for the basis of the appraisal were 2 beds, and our house was a 3-bed. And 4 of the 5 were under 1,000 square feet, and ours was
this
over
guy should
1,000
lose
feet.
his license.
Yes, so we challenged it, and the lender actually agreed with our case, and so that's. Sometimes you get bad appraisals, and so just like your friend who had the Michigan who had the bad appraisal. That happens when you have a 550 around the corner. That's not right, and you may run into that, and that's where you would want to challenge. But that's what can come into play, and that's again the risk. The risk factor is you just get a bad appraisal, and if you challenge and he doesn't want to come back and change, you're left with just a couple options, and that could be to try to do another one, or to just go with it. And so that's with Active Turnkey, and then. What happens? You pull out less money if you do that with a poor appraisal. So that's it. Bought wrong. Market shifted, bad appraisal. But this next one's a big part of it. For what we believe, and part of a value add that we bring is sometimes it's just plain misinformation by the appraiser. That's probably not his fault. And so to kind of go along with that, what we would say is sometimes he may use bad comps. Sometimes he may even have a wrong classification. If you look at appraisals, there's C2, 3, 4, 5, whatever that is.
That's a big deal.
Absolutely. That can be a big deal, especially when he claims that they may not have been updated recently.
Right, when everything's brand new.
Yeah, that's a big. We had that recently too, about a year ago, and it's like, hey, we just did a full rehab. Everything's new. But what happens is with and Tom, you can anytime stop me because I'm going now, and I feel like I'm really starting to pick up some steam. And is the issue you have is, like we said before, this may have happened 6 months prior, where you bought the house, you did a rehab, you placed a tenant, and now from the 6 months from the time you did all this work, you acquired the property, now you're going to do this appraisal. Sometimes the sale price on file, like on record, is not your actual purchase price.
All right.
Absolutely. I mean, depending on the acquisition, who you bought it from. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit, Tom. But we've had that happen where
I've even seen a comp be the same house when the person bought the property.
That's good.
So wow. I'm not sure how that made it through.
Wow.
But I mean, we've definitely seen some crazy things and some really bad information. And I think sometimes, honestly, it's like in any trade. I don't, I've heard about realtors. I mean, I've heard such bad things about realtors. I mean, I've even heard realtors called realtards. And I'm just like, I mean, I've heard such bad things, but you know what? I've dealt and worked with some amazing, awesome, wonderful, realtors. Really, I have amazing friends that are realtors. I've worked with really horrible loan officers, but I've worked with amazing loan officers as well. I've worked with some really horrible wholesalers. That if there was another picture that should have been on there, they think it is the Taj Mahal, but it's really falling apart, or they're like, it only needs carpet and paint, and you're just like, okay, nope, this needs a lot more than carpet and paint. But then I've worked with other wholesalers that really are honest and really do try to like come up with right things. So it's the same thing with any trade, and so appraisers are no different. There are 30% of them that probably absolutely are horrible. They're just lazy. They don't know they don't care. They have personal vendettas and personal, opinions that they think are more important than what their market than what their job is. You have other ones that are just kind of doing their job. They're fine. They do okay. And then you have other ones that are really good. They really take their time. They do what they're supposed to do. Oh, you have employees that are the same way sometimes, right? You have friends. You have family members, that are just can be the same way.
Tom was kind of whispering there when you said that because we're in the office. You don't want them to hear.
Jared. Yeah. But it's. I think it's the same thing in this industry. So it's no different. You're going to have the 30% of people that are horrible, 30% of them that are just okay, and then 30% of them that are really good on top of their game. And you hope to probably try to create relationships with those ones that really know their stuff. And sometimes they'll even give you hints and say, hey, if you would have done this, maybe, I could have appraised this for more, but right now it doesn't work. Or, hey, I'm glad you did this because this is actually something that really does help. So, and I think you can even create relationships with, say, 10 or 20 of those good appraisers that you think can continually help you and be honest with you and just give real honest, truthful data, and then just try to figure out a way to use them. And I think there's pools that you can create with different lending programs that, as long as they're in that pool, that and they know, hey, if that they can find a way to be able to appraise your property. But that's what all you're trying to do. For us, we do not try to influence the appraisers, but we do try to make sure that they know all the stuff that we've done to the property. It's just not fair. It's not fair if we've spent $50,000 on a rehab and they're looking at it like, it's been like this or something. And since we bought it for X amount of dollars and now we put $50,000 into the property, it's still worth what we bought it for. It's just not right. I mean, and most of what we do, and a lot of people that might be listening or fix and flippers or anything, you are forcing appreciation, and you should be able to force appreciation with lifting up the standard of a property and updating and all the things that you do.
And that kind of goes into the whole point is when you did all this stuff, you did this whole process, whether it was us or you're doing the Active Turnkey Burr Method. You've done all this stuff, and you haven't. The appraiser has no idea in some cases. He's just going to a house. So one thing we try to do is give him that information, let him know what happened. So getting back to the point, sometimes he may see on the record that the sale price was actually maybe what we acquired it for. And of course, as a company, if we sell an Active Turnkey, we are going to sell it for more than what we bought it for. Naturally, most companies want to make a profit. I think as a company owner,
why else would you have a business?
As a company owner, you get that. But if the appraiser may see our purchase on file and not that of what was on file for our sale. So for us, we supply the HUD for the purchase so that they know exactly what was the purchase price for that buyer. And then we also supply them with the scope of work. And so that without those two things, they may take different comps and use those different comps than what otherwise should have been used. So when it comes to Active Turnkey, those are risks. You bought wrong, shifting market, bad appraisal, misinformation, or even not having enough information that we didn't supply. We want them to know everything that we did so that it's a good appraisal. And so sometimes we can't blame anyone but ourselves in that situation.
Yeah, and there's one more thing, and maybe just a suggestion, and I think we've gotten better at this because I think that we at times weren't always perfect at this, but I think I think there's a suggestion that I can give you that you might want to just pay attention to and think about. just think about anybody else that goes to your property that's going to think about how much it's worth and what they might be willing to pay for it, right? So you have tenants and you have buyers, right? So what might you want to do for them to help them have a higher opinion of a property? What's the number one thing?
Curb appeal.
Curb appeal and cleanliness. Like, the cleaner you can make that thing sparkle and shine, you ought to be rolling out the red carpet for those appraisers. When the appraiser comes, that house should have never looked better ever than that one day that appraiser comes. So if you really want, one of the tips that I can give you is, number one, buy right. Know the square footage versus what other people's are. I mean, I think that when we first started doing this 7, 8, 9 years ago, we kept running into some issues, and then it finally dawned on us, hey, we were thinking 1,100 square foot house and 1,300 square foot house was the same. No, they're not. 1,100 square foot house is not going to appraise for what a 1,300 square foot house is going to appraise for. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's a big enough difference that it's going to make a difference. So that square footage is a big deal. But at the end, when that appraiser comes, everything needs to be as perfect as you can possibly make it, just like an open house would be. And I would even suggest, if you're going to stage it for a buyer or stage it for a tenant, like, try to stage it for the appraiser. And I know you can't always do that if you're selling turnkey and there's a tenant in the property, but you really got to try your absolute best to try to do whatever you possibly can to make that house look the absolute best it can at what it should look like, and not dirty and not,
Well, he's going to try to go in there and have a very sterile, boring idea of an assessment, but he is absolutely going to be affected by
you have to
condition.
be.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, you just have to think that it's just natural human nature.
Absolutely.
You go to a dirty restaurant, do you really think you want to go back? No. But if you go into a sparkling clean restaurant, you think to yourself, this has a higher value. So cleanliness does have a lot, not shouldn't have a lot to do with value, but it has a lot to do with somebody's opinion of value.
With my sarcasm, I would want to say, what does an appraiser do when he goes into a dirty restaurant?
I don't know, Jared.
I'm sorry. My mind was wandering. Okay, so we talked about the risk with turnkey, with active turnkey, and we wanted to show you, though, before we go finish this podcast, the other side of the coin when it comes to turnkey. So there are risks that are coming, and as the market shifts in the positive direction, as it starts shifting up, the other risks is that it just becomes, first of all, more difficult to find deal flow becomes a little bit more difficult because everyone, their mother's out buying houses now. And so some people have asked us, one thing we will openly say is that our active turnkey deals, they have slowed down over the last 6 months. And it's because of the amount of people in the market, because of construction costs going up, because of even material costs going up. So along with that, some of the pros to buying turnkey come along with the appraiser as well, with the appraisal. So first of all, we would say is you are buying at market value when you're buying turnkey. So that's something that's obvious. As for us, we want to sell at market value.
For us, we're selling at market value. I know many other turnkey providers around the country that sell much higher. Some of the best known ones, and the ones that sell them, there's one that in particular that I think sells more turnkey properties than anybody else in the entire country, and they sell well above market value.
And that's interesting. So, and it's going to tie actually a nice little bow around this when we get a little bit farther into this piece. But you're buying at market value, and it's very important. Number two, they're generally occupied, hence turnkey rentals. Okay. Number three, though, is, and Tom, you mentioned this to me actually earlier today, is they're cash flowing from day one. You said this earlier. Whereas an active turnkey, 3 to 6 to maybe 8 months, if something happens, there's no rent. So
if you just do easy math, if it's $1,000 a month rental, that's $6,000 that you have to kind of put into that equation. Total. I mean, maybe, and again, if you're looking at less cash out of pocket, sure, the active turnkey probably still might be there. But as far as weighing one versus the other in total bigger picture, sometimes turnkeys can be just as good of an investment.
Well, and we're getting to the appraisal piece. So if you're wondering why in the world are we talking about these things, we're trying to give you both sides of the coin. So the risks in active turnkey, but also the pros to turnkey on the other end. So it's market value, generally occupied, cash flowing from day one. But here's the key: market shift proof
at point of sale.
At point of sale.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's huge deal. That's a huge part of this. So when you buy the active turnkey, 6 months from now, the market shifts in the other direction, the wrong direction. Who's taking that hit? You are. You're taking that hit as the owner. If you're going to do a Burr Method deal, and for some reason now prices go down, values go down, or even they may even kind of stay there. You're taking some risk, but when you're buying turnkey, you are not taking that hit. The seller is.
At the point of sale.
At the point of sale.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people that are buying turnkeys are buying in markets that are a little bit more boring, or at least that's what we recommend.
Sure.
So there's probably not as much risk on that one way or the other. And I think at the end of the day, what it rents for is really the value.
Sure.
And, you know, the property doesn't know that it's worth less money. So if you're getting $12 or $13 a month in rent, it doesn't really matter. So in the long realm scheme of things, 200-year picture or 50-year picture, I don't think it's going to matter much. But as far as cash out of pocket, yes.
Well, it's important for those who may, if they evaluate the deal based upon the cash out of pocket. So those are the ones who would be very upset when the house appraises for 153 instead of 155, which happens. But in this case, it doesn't really matter to you because it doesn't affect you. The price is the price, and if it appraises for less, then that may be even to your advantage in some cases. But that's the next thing.
But like I said, I know a lot of turnkey providers out there that even if the house doesn't appraise, they're still sticking with their price, and you're bringing extra money to closing. So I don't know that we have gone that direction quite yet. Now, there have been some processes we have said we are just not going to sell because I know this house is worth more than this, and you know it doesn't really matter. We're getting way too much for rent for this to not to sell it for what we want to sell it for. But you know, there's definitely things to consider.
So those are some key things here, and two more to kind of to put a bow on it. No extra repairs. So we talked about the active turnkey, where one of the risks was the extra repairs. Well, when you're buying turnkey, you're not on the hook for those things. That's the seller. If he wants to sell, and you're not getting that hit, you're not getting that extra charge. Even when it comes to the sale
in the rehab itself. If you go into rehab, open up a door or open up a wall, and oh my goodness, I have to take care of a big issue here.
Yep.
In the middle of a rehab, all the rehab's been done, so the risk is more visible. You can see what's going on. Now, does that mean that you're never going to have any issues? Absolutely not. Does that mean that there's never going to be a repair in the first couple of months? Absolutely not. There are things that still happen, and a lot of times it's houses that just have sat for 2 years. And now they have issues. You have no idea that what's going to happen for a whole 3 or 6 months in a rehab. Nothing happens but when somebody's living in there, now things tend to settle and happen. So especially on homes that are a little older, there's a little even higher risk of something happening to that property, whether it's a sewer or whether it's drains or whatever the case could be. Things could just still go out, and you just don't know. But your risk is minimalized. Absolutely. And it's definitely lower as a turnkey property that's already been rehabbed, that's already maybe have an actual inspector has already gone through the property. The city inspector's probably already gone through into the property and given a green tag on all the work that's been completed. Right. So during that whole period of time, the seller holds all those risks when it comes to turnkey.
And so now you don't have to worry about that piece. You're kind of getting that. And again, what we have seen with a lot of guys who are doing the Burr Method, when all those repairs are coming in, and if their city gets involved, there's extras. Now they're kind of into the deal at value, which hence turnkey. Buying
turnkey
at market value.
At that point would have been better for that person because now they're already into the property for full market value, and they've lost a 6 or 8 months worth of rent. So they're actually into it more than they would have been into it if it was a turnkey.
And that's not even getting into the appraisal. So if you did all those things, you had those extras, you took long, you had the vacancy, no rent, then heaven forbid it doesn't appraise. So now it's even worse in that case. Whereas in the last point we would say is when you're buying turnkey, it's basically an appraisal proof where you're not taking that hit. You are protected. Is another way to put it. You're protected as a buyer because if the house doesn't appraise, let's say for instance, Tom and I are marketing a property from Olson Group, and the house doesn't appraise. It sells for $100,000. It appraises for $95,000. At that point, the bank tells the buyer, "Hey, here's the situation," and either the buyer and seller come back and split costs. The seller goes down 95, or the buyer comes to the table with more money. Either way, though, the buyer has a choice. You're protected in that case. And so, however that works, there's different ways you can get to that 100 and work with your seller, but you're still protected in the sense where you're not stuck with a property at below market value, or at least opinion of a market value. So these are just, again, a few of the things. I don't know if you want to add anything, Tom, but a few of the things that you'd want to be looking at, and the differences between Burr and Turnkey when it comes to the appraisal.
No, absolutely, and that's why we are pushing turnkey more than we are even pushing active turnkey right now. And I don't even think it's as big of a. I think people really try to blame, the product and getting product. For me, I don't think it's that as much. I think that the rehabbing part of the equation has changed so much in the last 5 years that that's a lot bigger part of it. And honestly, I believe it's causing a major issue in the country of affordable housing. Period. If you want to get into the whole another reason why you might want to buy turnkey rental properties right now, think about the affordable crisis that's happening, and it's going to happen, and it's not going to get any better. It's going to get way worse before it gets better when it comes to the affordability of properties across the United States. And that's why I think if you're buying houses under $200,000, it is almost, I'm not going to say it's bubble proof completely, but it is almost it's a hedge, in my opinion. I think buying single family rentals under $200,000 is a long-term hedge against massive inflation and against the fact that we don't have affordable housing being built right now. The only affordable housing that's being built is in apartments, and the apartments are getting to the point in some areas where they're already overbuilt and they're already going too much in that direction. So people are not getting those single family rentals where people really want to live.
Sure.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, in most of middle class America, in the Midwest and the Southeast, single family rentals under $200,000, I believe, are going to, I actually still believe in 20 years we may not even see houses worth under $200,000. And if that's the case, like, that might change everybody's strategy when they're thinking long term. I know that I've heard lots of people talk about this and go on and on and on in depth about it. But I'm telling you, in my opinion, single family rentals is maybe the best investment out there right now, if you're looking at it in a 50-year picture.
So we're going to finish up with just a real quick process and how, if you work with us, you'll know this process really well. But when we do Active Turnkey, Burr Method, or we do our turnkey deals, when we're working with appraisers, we want to make sure, to our benefit and to our clients, that the house appraises. As much as within our power, we want to provide that appraiser with as much information. And as Tom said, if you are actually even doing your own personal home and you want to do a cash out refinance and you want to pull out as much money as possible, there's a few things that you can do to try to help the appraiser as he's appraising. So one thing we mentioned already, is we send the HUD for the purchase. So especially if you're doing Burr Method, you want them to see what you paid for the home. You want to see the scope of work. So if you did any improvements, if it's your own home improvements, for us, we generally do a decent amount of work in our scopes. So we want the appraiser to see what we've done in the property. We send them comps. We send them comparables in the area that we believe are comparable, that are similar: bed, bath, square footage, garage, basement, even lot size comparables, so that arm them, again, because you've done all that work, or we've done all that work up to this point, and we want to arm that appraiser with as much information as possible, and then we'll even include our own opinion of value.
Well, I mean, I think it is important to point out, you never want to, on purpose, try to influence what the appraiser is going to appraise it for. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to just give him the information so he can make an educated decision on what the property is worth. So just keep that in mind, and that's something you don't want to do. You don't really want to go to the appraiser and tell them, hey, like, you should really appraise this. What do I have to do to get you to appraise it for this amount of money? You don't want to do that. That's not what you want to do, and that's not the purpose of us trying to arm the appraiser with the actual information. All we want is the truth. All we want is like transparency, and we're just trying to say, hey. And then honestly, like I would love for appraisers to tell me why. You know, like to me, I don't know that they do it too often, but I would love for appraisers to help educate the public on like how can, you know, why does a house appraise for this amount of money and why doesn't it? And you know, sometimes when they're in the exact same neighborhood and in the exact same floor plan, the exact same house, and the exact same finishes, why one appraises for more than the other within a 3-month period of time is beyond me. I don't understand it. But all I can give you is from our experience and what we've seen, and hopefully this will help somebody out there that's going to work with an appraiser.
And the other thing I'll add to that is in most cases, the appraisers appreciate it because they don't believe we're trying to manipulate their opinion of value. It's literally for that information, to the point where the ones we work with consistently ask us for this. They ask us for the scope of work, or they ask for the lease, or they ask for, you know, what's the current rent, what's it renting for, and so on. So they appreciate that because they want as much. That's what they work off. They work off of information.
You got it.
And so providing them with that information is huge. And so you're actually giving them value yourself while you're trying to appraise your own home. So
absolutely,
we hope we brought you value today. If you were to appraise us, hopefully we would hit market value. Yeah. So hopefully you enjoyed this podcast.
Give us a 5-star rating.
Yeah, we'll take it. Absolutely. And remember, we do sell rental properties. So if you're looking for rental properties, we build rental portfolios for investors. So you can reach me at Jared at Olson Group, or you can visit us at buyolsongroup.com. And remember, Active Turnkey,
the best way to buy rentals.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.